And that's where the citizens come in. Because I think one of the things we have to learn is that how we're moving into an era where we have to get a lot more focused and doing more with less in the government and in the community. And so it is in this area of finding solutions that where I think giving circles and community groups become really important. There is a great deal of focus on the grassroots. And I think a lot of the conversation we had today was about really working with the communities and our local communities. But even in the grassroots era, and was something that I think Deborah talked about with talking about the artisans group, that we are actually beginning to see a phenomena we haven't seen before also, which is sort of the global grassroots. A grassroots in the sense it's small, it has got a sense of intimacy in it, but at the same time, it is not as dependent on a place as we have been accustomed to. You are, both with the rise of the technology and the fact that this is a country, increasingly a country of diasporas. I mean, we talk about the rise of immigration among Hispanic Americans and Hispanics. The reality is even with African Americans, there's some 20% of what's called the neo-African Americans who are actually people who did not grow up in this country, were not born in this country. There's a profound shift and a melding of cultures and histories and backgrounds that are going on that make the challenge of what we do at the level of the community both more liberating on the one hand and more challenging on the other hand. And I'm starting with the global issues because I think as I look at the landscape of the most profound problems that we as a society face, most of them have both a local and a global dimension. And I think in a way, as we start looking at what is available and what is accessible at the locally, unless we have that global view in mind as well, I think it'll be quite difficult. And in fact, the models of community engagement are also global in a lot of ways. I mean, we heard a number of talk about the microloans, the microfinance, although actually the whole notion of microfinance started off not in the West, but actually in Bangladesh with the Grameen Bank, as you know. And I think that what we are seeing also around the world, and again with communications allowing us, are lots of new models that are evolving. And one of the roles that giving circles as citizen groups can do is actually try to look a lot more effectively at the ways in which we can, when you talk about the capacity building and models of change, what can we do? Now, Tocqueville, in his book Democracy in America, talked about something with particular about the uniqueness of the Americans, which is about the ability of citizens to band together and create a common purpose. And giving circles, even though it's a relatively new phenomenon, represent an age-old tradition of communities grouping together for the common good. In that sense, the giving circles have to be thought of both as a team sport in the great American tradition and a contact sport in the sense that there's a lot of engagement among us. But it's also a part of building the communities, of communities of giving and of sharing. And what does this, and we talked a bit about the learning as important of it, but what is that learning really about? In my view, it is a learning of moving away from a sense of charity or sense of helping others, to a sense of real partnership and a sense of creating something that is of mutual value because we are collectively creating something that is much larger than what we would have either as individuals or even as small groups of our own accomplished. And I think that is very important because the whole relationship of the grantee and the grantor, grant maker, changes from not of the helper and the helped to actually co-investors towards a common vision. And unless we do that, I think we will recreate the kinds of paternalistic and patronizing relationships that have too often marred, I think, the social change that we have, I think, not been able to do very often. And I think it starts off with the idea of a basic respect for those we are intending to quote-unquote help, which is to recognize that organizations and individuals we're helping are first of all a source of largely they're engines of self-reliance that we are only providing a help on the side, and secondly recognizing they're also engines of innovation. And unless we are in our capacity building and act as catalysts for supporting that kind of innovation and self-reliance, I think we will be much more difficult. It also means taking accountability to a different level. It is not accountable in terms of have you done what we had promised to do, but rather have you responded to the opportunities and the changes that were unanticipated in ways that have been more effective. It is less about the contract and more about the vision. It is less about obligation and more about trust. And I think that is the paradigm that will make us both more agile and more effective and more dynamic in an environment where the future is quite much more uncertain. And it is also, and I think I was really glad to hear that it's much more than money. Sometimes it is almost not the money itself. It is the sense of the sharing of the ideas, the sense of investing in terms of the work. It is sweat as much as money. And I think that will be something that will be pretty critical. But it requires a certain amount of analytical discipline that I think often we don't have, which is to say, we're not going to hold you accountable for doing exactly what you say you're going to do, because we want you to do the best, make the best judgments, and we're not going to constrain you from making the best judgment. But tell us, to the extent of forethought you have, what is it that you expect to do, and what results do you expect it to produce, and what is the relationship between what you intend to do and what is it the results that you're likely to produce. And that logic sometimes is very important. A lot of the times we tend to forget that even in social change, there are many models of change or efforts that don't work. And part of the role, and part of the learning role for Giving Circles, as well as other philanthropic investors, is to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And that brings me back to the point of the value of the network. That it is very hard for us individually, just in our own circles, to have the full access to the knowledge that's being garnered and experiences that are garnered elsewhere. And I think what a Giving Circles network can do is be the idea bank in some sense, and the experience bank, so that we can more efficiently access both ideas, not just by happenstance, but in a much more systematic way. Because at the end of the day, I think if we were to gather here 5 years from now, we would look back and say, what is it that has made us really successful? It is not going to be about, I hope and I trust it will not be about how much money we have raised, but how much impact we have had. It will be about taking on challenges that we thought were difficult, that we were able to break it down into steps to start garnering, and where our small circles, and I thought what Celeste said before about the network of circles pooling resources and pooling ideas, was able to actually build a social movement. The reality is, with just like, $5, $10 bake sales are not sufficient. The reality is that small giving circles by themselves will not reach the optimum they can unless we're able to pool ourselves a lot more effectively in terms of at least contributing to a social movement of change. And I think the culture, therefore, of within the Giving Circles that you are shepherding is very, very important, which is to consciously promote the idea of debate. You do not know whether you have made a right choice either in your grant giving or in support of an organization unless you know what is the next alternative that you did not pursue. And it requires, at a time of limited resources, where even if you're the most generous of you are willing to put in the money, I think the reality overall will make you ask, even if you don't want to ask, am I making the best use of that money? And I think we need to get much more rigorous, but being very clear about what is it that we are supporting, why are we supporting it, how will we know that it has not worked, in addition to knowing how it has worked, and also, as we promote risk-taking, to also promote the learning, so that we have to start making mistakes. We have to move away from doing just things that are safe. And we have to move away from doing, even at a time of crisis, of moving from palliative care to actually trying to rebuild a new social fabric. And at the end of the day, systemic change happens at a large scale, but it's really rooted in what happens at the level of the individuals and the communities ultimately. So I hope that you will get a chance to dream large, but realize at the same time that just like no man is an island, as John Donne once said, that no circle is ever complete by unto itself. So I hope that in that chance that you have to interact, I hope you find some of the common ground as well. Thank you.